Answers in Genesis is launching a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky that really involves freedom of religion, free exercise of religion, freedom of speech in this great nation of America.
Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. We have a really tremendous program lined up for you. This gentleman here with me is Matt Singleton, who you probably recognize from previous programs. And our special interview by speakerphone is Mike Johnson from Freedom Guard, who is, what would you say, a public service?
We're a public interest law firm.
Public interest.
A nonprofit organization, yes, sir.
My name is Matt Singleton. I'd like to say hello to you, Mike.
Hey, Matt, thank you.
I've been working with Dr. Simon a little bit, and I'm a minister. I've been really starting up apologetics creation ministry myself.
Amen.
You know, especially after seeing these connections, like when you see all the political persecution, and you realize that the whole justification is stuff that they're legally hampering us on. Do you remember the Kentucky Common Core legislation that would come through the last couple of years?
I recall seeing it. I'm in Louisiana, but I work nationwide, so it's the same similar battle they're having.
Yeah, I was kind of noticing how, like, you know, when I talked to AIG, they were kind of hampered, you know, to keep their 501c3 status from really kind of giving a testimony in situations like that. And here they are following the letter of the law, and now they get legally discriminated against anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It's an incredible double standard we see. You know, the leftist organizations can do anything they want, but if you're a Christian organization, you get treated like a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with your with your YouTube presentation.
Thanks.
It was very clear, and you know, there was a lot of information that was just the opposite of what you got out of the media.
Oh, yeah. That's why we had to do it. I just tried to set the record straight. You know?
Okay. So we wanted to talk just a little bit to Mike, who's the attorney, and ask him to explain what's going on with Answers in Genesis and the Ark project. But could you just give us an overview of what the problem is?
Well, sure. We have filed a federal lawsuit against the state of Kentucky and its officials, including the governor, on behalf of Answers in Genesis, which I'm sure your audience is aware is a large Christian nonprofit organization. They do a lot of apologetics ministries and great work around the country. They also operate the Creation Museum. And they had an idea many years ago to develop another theme park, as it were, the Ark Encounter, which would be anchored around a life-size, fully wooden replica of Noah's Ark and a number of attractions related to that. So Answers in Genesis proceeded with that. They wanted to avail themselves of a tax rebate program the state of Kentucky has. And Kentucky was anxious to get the theme park built in the northern part of the state there, and so they gave preliminary approval for Answers in Genesis to use that same incentive program the way many other theme parks and tourist attractions had used it in recent years. Something happened, however, a couple of years into the project, as the Ark is being built, as the theme park is moving forward, the state of Kentucky suddenly reversed course and informed Answers in Genesis that they would no longer be able to avail themselves of that opportunity. And to be honest, the real reason they did it is because they thought basically the park they decided was too Christian, effectively. So we had to go to proceed to the federal court to get this straightened out because what the state of Kentucky did here is unlawful.
Wow, that is an amazing, and you know, as I've read the different news stories about this situation. They said, oh, well, no one can have this situation where they're going to hire Christians. Mm-hmm. They have to hire everybody. And, of course, that's not true. Isn't that correct, Mike?
That is not true. I mean, it's very clear on the facts here, because it's all very well documented, that Answers in Genesis application to participate in the tax rebate incentive program, like everyone else, was rejected solely because of the religious identity and the message of AIG and its ministry. And one of the problems the state had, as you pointed out there, is they said, well, you can't use a religious preference in your hiring practices for the theme park. In other words, you can't have a policy that says you're only going to hire Christians to advance your Christian message. Well, of course, that's a nonsensical legal position for the state to take. Federal and state law are very clear that if you are a religious organization, a religious entity or corporation, then you have every right to avail yourself of the provisions under law that allow you to utilize a religious preference in hiring. It only makes good sense. I mean, if a church is going to go out and hire a new staff member, obviously they want to hire people that agree with their doctrine, with their statement of faith. And a religious organization is no different. And that's why the federal law has always allowed that exemption for religious groups, and state law does as well. And just put very simply, the state of Kentucky has no legal basis to make that kind of decision or to exercise that kind of discrimination against Answers in Genesis.
You know something, I think about all the public entertainment, all the, the various museums, the Disney World, the Epcot Center, they can promote an evolutionary worldview. When you think about Disney, and obviously we don't think too deeply into this, but every Disney movie I ever watched had a traditional pagan worldview of magic and fairy tales, and there was no public outcry or discrimination or anything brought about because of that. And here you have this ministry, which we start off with the Creation Museum, and they really put Petersburg, Kentucky on the map. They're really helping out the community.
Right,
people are getting jobs, and everything's going great. And then they say, okay, well, hold on. Because of your identity and because you have a worldview, well, we're going to assume all of a sudden that you're Congress and that we need to stop you from having any type of ideas or any message or anything that's actually helping people anyway.
Well, you're right. And to be real honest, what happened here, people say, well, why did the state of Kentucky change course like this? Why did they suddenly, just reverse course on the Answers in Genesis? I mean, people remember seeing the video, the press conference that was held just a couple of years ago, where the governor of Kentucky went out and just openly touted the Ark Encounter.
Right.
So excited about it because, gentlemen, they saw the feasibility study just as you and I have seen, and it says that they're going to bring hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of several years.
Wow.
Hundreds of new jobs.
Think of that.
The tax and economic incentives that will be brought even to the surrounding region and surrounding businesses in the area is just overwhelming. And so, I mean, they have a feasibility study that says that the Ark Encounter theme park would draw about 1.6 million visitors in its first year alone. And so, given all those statistics, the state very, very logically got in favor of it and got behind it. But everybody says, well, we remember that. We remember the state's enthusiasm. We remember the governor's press conference where he was applauding it and being a cheerleader for it. What happened? Well, what happened was some secularist organizations found out about it, and they started to raise their voices. And they put tremendous pressure on state officials to rescind the approval of Answers in Genesis because they are a Christian organization. And that's exactly what happened. So it's as if a different standard applies here to the religious organization just because of their viewpoint and their worldview. And thankfully for all of us, that is still unlawful in the United States, and that's why the federal court is going to sort it out.
And let's think about this as far as the double standard, because there are things I've noticed. A couple years ago, I actually ended up getting my face on a couple newspapers and the Huffington Post, and we were basically, as regular citizens, nothing special, trying to talk over at Frankfurt about this new policy with the next generation science standards where they were going to promote the religious idea of evolution as no longer theory but pure fact. And, AIG is a ministry. They made themselves a 501c3 nonprofit, and they followed the letter of the law. And they said, okay, well, we can't personally, bring our scientists out to that hearing because of our status. And so here they were following the letter of the law, and now they're, treated as if, well, no, you're not, because you have a religious identity. And obviously there's that double standard comes in and says, no, you can't bring the facts, you can't bring the evidence. And I'll throw one at you. You may have heard about this guy. This is recently. There is a scientist out in California, Mark Armitage, been a scientist for over 20 years, and he was fired from his university because he discovered the world's largest triceratops horn, and that horn had blood cartilage tissue in it. And because that disproves evolution, obviously that horn must have been born again and told everybody about Jesus, and they said, well, we can't fire the horn, so we're going to have to fire you for discovering something, because scientists aren't supposed to discover things that disprove evolution.
Terrible.
Yeah, that's the kind of treatment we're seeing for those who still adhere to a biblical worldview, and it's unfortunate and it's unlawful. I mean, look, the federal law is very clear. The Supreme Court is very consistent in all of these opinions and rulings on point, and that is there's this principle in the law that we call government neutrality, and that is that the government is not allowed to show favoritism for one particular religion, because that would be a violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. But on the other hand, the government cannot show hostility towards religious viewpoints either. And when they do, that's called viewpoint discrimination, and it's blatantly unconstitutional. And the courts are very consistent about that. So that's why we had to file suit here. This is a glaring example of viewpoint discrimination. I mean, you have the governor of Kentucky, the secretary of tourism in that state, who have just come out very bluntly and said, we are not going to allow you to participate in this tax rebate program, basically because you are Christian.
That's really bad.
And your Bible theme park, which is just a silly notion. They knew, of course, what the park was from the very beginning, and that you're going to, exercise a religious preference in your hiring. The very frank state of the law is that Answers in Genesis is clearly allowed to do both of those things lawfully, and so the state has overstepped its bounds here. We expect the federal court will remind them of that.
I think Kentucky government is suffering from a psychological issue. I believe that they're starting to come out with this. It's called creation phobia. And these creation phobes, they want to judge us, but not just judge us with words, but actually take us to court and, legally go against us and stuff. But basically, all we want is that mutual understanding and that ability to talk about facts and the ability to talk about science. And, I saw Steve Beshear, at that event I was telling everybody about with the Next Generation Science Standards. He said, we need to move forward. But I'll tell you this, okay, just growing up in Kentucky schools, I know that, number one, you're not going to hear about that Triceratops horn. But, I heard in 1991 about Piltdown Man, which in 1950, 40 years earlier, they discovered was an orangutan jaw wired onto a human skull cap. And they discovered that that was a fraud. So why is it that in 1991 in Stewart Middle School, I was taught that Piltdown Man was a fact? That should be called fraud. It is illegal in many states. I don't know Kentucky law on it. But for some reason, that's okay. And it's okay for us to put our money into ideas like that. But yet, if we want to have freedom outside of the government to state the facts, well, then all of a sudden we're a problem.
Well, you're right. And the concern that you're articulating really should be of concern to more than just creationists. I mean, look, all freedom-loving Americans ought to have great concerns about these government abuses, regardless of their perspectives on the book of Genesis or even the Christian faith for that matter, because when you have state action that goes unchallenged like this, it sets a dangerous precedent for everyone, for all other religions and minority groups as well. And so Ken Ham and the team at Answers in Genesis have been this is for a freedom. This is about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the freedom of conscience. The right of conscience is fundamental. The understood that.
Mike, I just wanted to clarify.
To preserve those freedoms, or they're going to be taken away from them.
I just wanted to clarify something that you made so clear in the YouTube presentation, and that is that really what is being debated is whether or not some of the tax money that the Ark Project collects can actually be given back to the Ark Project, just like any other organization.
Exactly.
I mean, it's so obvious.
Genesis is not asking for any kind of special treatment. There's nothing
Right.
extraordinary or controversial about it at all. All they're saying is, look, the state of Kentucky has a tax rebate program. It's an incentive program to draw in
Right.
new large tourist attractions. And you've given it to beer distillery museums, the motor speedway, other theme parks, aquariums. So here we come, Answers Genesis says, just to play along with that same program. And what it means is, if we generate a certain number of tax dollars over a 10-year period, the state will rebate back to us those brand new tax dollars that are generated from all these out-of-state tourists who will be coming to visit the Ark Encounter theme park. And that's perfectly lawful, perfectly fits within the scheme of the legislation in Kentucky there. And there's no reason in the world why we should not be able to participate in that and avail ourselves of that same opportunity. Kentucky says, yeah, but you're Christian.
Help us, Lord. Now, I just want to ask you one other thing. You know, we hear all the time the ACLU is suing people, and a lot of times they'll win, and then the ACLU will collect a lot of money from the state. And I just wonder if turnabout is fair play on that. It seems like they've really gone out on a limb here. And if you and the Ark Project are successful, would they be able to collect any money from the state of Kentucky for discriminating against them like that?
Well, we would. Now, we've not sued for damages against AIG. We've sued for the violation of their constitutional rights. So this is really a case largely on principle, but to prevent setting a bad precedent. See, if the state is allowed to do this to Answers in Genesis, they can do it to any Christian
Right.
or other entity. And so it's a very dangerous thing to allow to happen. So thankfully, Answers in Genesis has the wherewithal to draw a line in the sand and say, no, not on our watch. We're not going to allow that. Now, there is a provision under federal law that says in a constitutional law case like this, when you're suing on a civil rights matter,
Right.
if you prevail in that, then you can avail yourself of a reasonable attorney fee award for having to go to the trouble. That's how our organization operates. Freedom Guard and the Center for Religious Expression, which is our co-counsel in the case on behalf of Answers in Genesis. We serve.
Well, that's good.
We serve for free. If we win the case, then the state will pay our attorney's fees for our time and trouble. And look, we were very clear with the state. Ken Ham said in his press release when we launched, our organization has spent many months attempting to reason with state officials so that this lawsuit would not be necessary. I mean, we begged them not to make us go to this extreme, but they gave us no choice. And so we take no pleasure in suing the state. But sometimes, as Scripture says, there's a time to every purpose under heaven.
Yes.
And we've sued them. I predict that we are going to win this case. And yes, the state will have to pay our attorney's fees at the other end of it.
Tremendous. That is really great. Well, listen, maybe we'll let Mike Johnson, the attorney, go, and we'll try to get some excerpts from his outstanding YouTube presentation. It covers all of this, and I just think that maybe God was in this. They will win this and be able to stay in business because they were able to defend the rights of every Kentuckian.
Well, and Ken Ham, I've got a lot of respect for him, and he's not been an enemy to Kentucky. He has been
he's
example.
tremendous.
He's an immigrant from Australia, but I got to see one time There's a exclusive club in Kentucky, and I'm trying to remember what they called it. The Kentucky. I'm sorry, I just had like my mind go blank. But basically, if you're like Colonel, he was nominated as a Kentucky Colonel.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't put somebody up there if they're really somebody who's causing trouble.
Right.
He's been an example and a role model, a Kentucky Colonel and stuff in his short time here. And the thing is that it's the government that's putting this negativity. And think about this idea, okay? You have these tax rebates. They want to give them to places that promote alcoholism. They want to promote all this kind of stuff. You have, let me put my KGR hat on, you have the governor who's done nothing but promote casinos over and over again, all the social ills. He wants to put Kentucky on that map, on that quest, okay, because he says, hey, it's okay, I'm a preacher's kid.
Yeah,
that's what he's doing when he was campaigning. He's like, I'm a preacher's
Lord
kid.
help us.
Everything's great, and it's all going to work out. Well, I'll tell you what, he's giving bad preacher's kids a bad name.
Let me ask Mike one other quick question. Is this litigation slowing down the Ark Encounter project or not?
Well, it's going forward. They've begun construction. I think at the Answers in Genesis website, they've got some video of the dirt being moved around and all of that. So they're planning to open in the spring of next year, 2016. It's still on track.
Great.
Yeah, with the tax rebate incentive, what that would affect is the future phases of the project, perhaps the timing of that. I mean, most of this is funded by private individuals, donations, and that kind of thing. We're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 million in the tax rebate that would be denied here if the state is allowed to continue on course. As I mentioned, I think the federal courts are going to set the state straight on that, and that $18 million will go back into the coffers of Answers to Genesis, and perhaps they can build out the final phases of the park on a quicker timetable. So it does directly affect the overall cash flow of the project, but not its opening date and its operation. It'll go forward. Thanks be to God.
Okay, well, Mike Johnson and Freedom Guard, we certainly appreciate you filling us in on all this information about the Ark project. And it's tremendous that Kentucky is able to have something like this. And we'll show some of the YouTube video. And thanks again.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you.
Freedom Guard is a not-for-profit public interest law firm dedicated to the defense of religious liberty in America. And as you know, that's a liberty that's under increasing assault, and there's a lot of work to be done to defend that. Freedom Guard is joined in this case, as you know, by the Center for Religious Expression, which is our colleagues at another top religious defense organization, and they do this work in the courts around the country. And well, this legal action has become necessary because the state of Kentucky has taken some adverse action with regard to the ministry. What they've done, in effect, is engaged in viewpoint discrimination. They have decided to exclude this organization from a tax rebate program that's offered to all applicants across the state.
Numerous bloggers and media outlets have spread a lot of misinformation about the tax rebate program, and also a lot of false information about employment laws as they relate to the Ark Encounter project. So the tourism incentive here in Kentucky has nothing to do with a facility like the Ark project using taxpayer money to build it, because $0 are used from the state to build it. It's just a rebate program after it's open and generating sales tax, and it's all because it's bringing economic impact to the community, to the state. That's what it's all about. And secondly, what's happening is really a violation of the laws in this nation that allow the free exercise of religion. Tell me, people say that, oh, but if you're receiving a benefit from the government because you're getting a tax rebate, you can't do that as a religious organization, separation of church and state and so on. How do you react to those sorts of accusations that we see in the media and from many of the bloggers?
Well, it's based on misinformation and a misunderstanding about the law. Look, it's very well established in federal and state law that religious organizations get to be treated just like any other in a program like this. When you have a facially neutral, that's what we call it in constitutional law, a facially neutral tax incentive program that the government effectively opens it to all applicants, Just because an applicant happens to be religious does not mean that they can be treated differently. They can't be excluded from the program just because of their viewpoint.
You know something? Not long after we had that whole situation with Common Core and the next generation science standards, all of a sudden there was a major debate. And there was a major debate between Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis
Yeah.
and Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah.
And when Bill Nye got there, I watched this debate, and the funny thing was Bill Nye starts talking and he says, "I want you Kentucky voters to know blah, blah, blah."
Kentucky
Now,
voters.
once again, we're not supposed to put our creationist views out in the public, okay? Because people are so creation phobic that they don't want to hear anything. It might promote morality as opposed to, like, something better, like helping out with all our wine distilleries. But when we go back to that, he says, "Hey, I want to talk to you Kentucky voters," because they know that if they push an evolution worldview, they'll start pushing socialistic ideals. And that's what they want to do to Kentucky.
Yes,
They
that's
want to have
terrible,
that big
terrible.
government run our lives. And that's why they hate, that's why they're so phobic about creationism, because then people might start to believe and fear God and say, "Hey, maybe we should make sure that our children aren't around all these horrible social ills like gambling and drinking and
Drugs
and everything
crime
else."
and
Yeah.
and poor academic achievement.
That'll
and
make people come
sexually
running back to the
transmitted
government.
diseases and all the other stuff that comes from it. Okay, well, listen, we'll let the rest of the program pretty much go into excerpts of these outstanding videos. And I want to thank Matt Singleton for being on the program.
Thank you.
It's
Can I make one little statement
Please,
quick?
please.
Go to my website, www.biblesmack.net, BIBLESMACK.net. I am now starting to teach on a lot of philosophical and scientific concepts. If you're a church, I can come and talk to y'all, or I could talk to any other type of small groups. Or if you want to debate, we can do a public debate or do a debate on my radio program. I'm here. I want to start talking about the facts and talking about the real issues and the real knowledge and truth.
Boy, that's great. Okay, we appreciate you all watching, and tune in again next week for the rest of the news.
We've defended these cases for nearly 20 years, our organizations in the federal and state courts around the nation, and we provided our legal services and litigation services to persons of faith and organizations, and even sometimes to government officials who are on the right side of these issues. And we're nonprofit organizations, so we provide all of our services as a public interest. It's free of charge to our clients, and the government should not be hostile to people who have religious viewpoints.